peeps, welcome back to my channel. Today we're diving back into the wedding dress series. So the topic for today is the skirt. The skirt is a huge piece of what made this dress so special, and I'm excited to share with you all of the details. I have copious amounts of notes on my phone, so I'll be referencing them throughout so I don't miss anything at all. But without further ado, let's get into it. This entire dress saga, as you know if you followed along, was based on the dress I tried on in store, and looking at the skirt portion specifically, I was pretty sure it was some kind of circle skirt, which made things easier for me, I guess, because that meant I didn't need to have a pattern. I could just use an online circle skirt calculator and then kind of move on from there. So I found one, and it very helpfully had images of what the different types of circle skirts looked like, so like a quarter, a half, and so on. And I really liked the fullness it showed when it was a 1.5 circle skirt. So I decided this is going to be an extravagant dress anyway. This is the time to go full swoosh. It was so good. I'll try and link it down below if I can find the same page again. It was really good, helpful. As I said, I used this online calculator to get the rough measurements for what I needed, also in terms of like fabric usage. And then I made a paper pattern first. I ended up going with 5 panels in total. So 4 of them are cut on the fold, and then the final one I split down the middle to be able to not have seams at the center front, but be able to offset them slightly, but still have a center back seam where I could actually get the skirt on and off. A recurring theme in this whole project has also been fluctuating sizes and accommodating that, and how I decided to tackle that for this part of the project specifically was I wanted to cut out my pattern and like pre-make things, but I also knew I could still go up and down in size quite a lot. And circle skirts in that regard are a bit tricky because, I mean, you can always make them bigger and a bit shorter, but you can't really go back and add in to make it smaller again. So on purpose, I cut the waist way too small, and then I cut the skirt way too long, because that gave me the ability to kind of narrow in on whatever size I was when we got a lot closer to the day. And this worked out perfectly. It was such a good way to do this. And of course I did waste a little more fabric, but this also meant that I could do like the bulk of the sewing of the seams and stuff months in advance. And I had a base that I could just adjust down when we got closer. So that was really helpful. My first step was laying down the massive amounts of fabric. I think I calculated roughly 10 meters of fabric just for the skirt alone. Laid that out, laid my pattern piece on it, got everything cut out, and then sewed together and zigzag stitched to have like a nice clean finish. And then I let it hang to warp out. Circle skirts, because they're cut with like bias in them, or depending on how you do it, but there's a lot of bias drape that can happen, so it's good practice to let them hang a bit before you hem them, so you're able to even out the hem. This fabric, the poly satin, it didn't warp at all basically, so this was a bit unnecessary, but if I'd been using, I think, basically anything else, this would have been a necessary step. So the skirt actually hung, I think, for months in my closet, all seamed together, but just not stretching out. In terms of construction otherwise, I wanted some fullness and some stiffness. So I'd seen people adding horsehair braid to the hems of skirts, and I didn't like the look of like a wider horsehair braid. It's very obvious you get like a piece that's completely flat, that like stands up in its own, and then the skirt kind of swoops in from there. I'll try to insert a picture of what I mean. But I had found a tutorial where they'd used like a really skinny horsehair braid. I think it was 1.5 centimeters, and it gave the skirt just that tiny bit more structure, and it was a good way to finish off the hem. So I started hunting for that. I did have quite a hard time finding that in Denmark, but luckily there was a shop that had it. That was how I hemmed the skirt. I added the horsehair braid to it. The black edge peeking through is the narrow horsehair braid. And you can see it just gives it a bit of stiffness that it wouldn't otherwise have. And in terms of how to do it, I actually referred back to that tutorial. It was amazingly helpful. Adding the horsehair was surprisingly difficult. It was a really odd experience of like having to pull the fabric in a certain direction to not get it to warp too much. And thank God for the ironing board, because it did come out pretty wonky, but most of it ironed away, which was lucky. But I've linked that tutorial down below and it was very, very helpful. Before it came time to actually hem it, I had to have added the waistband, so I knew like the length, the finished length of what it was gonna be. What I ended up doing size-wise with the skirt was I cut it bigger than the size I was, and then I left the front panel completely smooth over my my waist, but then I added a gathering stitch around the back here, so that the skirt was more full in the back. And this also helped to hide the opening over here. So the waistband has an additional cotton layer inside, both to hide the raw seam I didn't manage to catch, and just for a little bit more stability. There is also interfacing in this layer. I didn't mention that I added some ties to the side so I could actually hang the skirt up. That's the kind of thing you don't really think about when you're making garments for yourself. There was definitely some transportation issues I hadn't considered when I first started. I had my mother here, my grandmother, to help me that day actually. So while I started off getting the waistband attached, and then my grandmother helped me. So I was wearing the skirt with the right shoes and everything, and she pinned all around me to get it to the right length. And then we discussed how much hem allowance I would actually need. And then she went around with a ruler and a pen and marked where I would need to cut the fabric away to get the right length. And Grandma, if you're watching this, thank you so much. That was a huge effort you did, but it turned out really, really well. The skirt has to have a closure, right? I mean, you can't not close the skirt, it has to. Yeah, in terms of closures, I had, at the time of making the skirt, been showed a lot of videos on YouTube actually about 18th century petticoat zero waist skirt type things, and I had experimented with the double tie closure, and also later on with just a single tie closure, just one opening in one side and a single tie. I found the double ties to be a bit too restrictive, and again, as someone whose size fluctuates a bit, I didn't like, it felt too restrictive anyway, but I did actually really like the single tie closure I came up with. I can show you that later if you're interested. So I was wondering if I could do something similar for this skirt. There's a lot of fullness that would hide the slit, and the technique in the 18th century petticoats is that if you just make the slit deep enough, there will be enough overlap that no one will ever see it. So I actually ended up just doing that. There's a long slit in the back of the skirt, and then I have two hooks and eyes that close over the waistband, and that's it. If we flip this here, you can see that's my one set of hooks, and here's the other. Actually, also to further hide the slit, I folded it back slightly because then it lay really nice. We tried this on me and it just fell really well this way, hiding the slit and all the gathering back here. I've just hand tacked, focus. I've just hand tacked this bit of the waistband back and then added the closure. It worked and it was so comfortable. Nobody saw the slit at all, and it was just easy. It was so much easier than inserting a zipper or doing any of that. So I'm really pleased with that bit of construction work. Yeah, so cool. 2 final features I added to the skirt. So in Denmark, it's tradition that you dance a wedding waltz at the end of the night with your husband, and we wanted to do that as well. And my husband and I can't dance, so we had found some YouTube tutorials and practiced at home beforehand in the skirt and the shoes, because there was a lot of fabric and how were we gonna move, and again, none of us are dancers. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't a secret. I sold the entire dress in our living room. He saw it every step of the way. I did try and make sure he didn't see it like combined before the actual day, but like he had seen all the individual pieces. There was never going to be any hiding the dress from him. But what we realized was it would be a lot easier to dance if I could lift up a portion of the skirt pretty easily, because then he was a little less likely to actually step in my hem. So I added just like a tiny elastic to a little loop to one side of the hem on the inside, so I could just kind of loop it over my finger and we could waltz around. And that was a nice tiny touch. The other thing I did, as I mentioned in the bodice video, I wanted some way of connecting the 2 pieces, the bodice and the skirt, together so they felt more cohesive. So I added thread bars to the underside of the waistband where the bodice then hooked on. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it definitely did the trick. I had never intended on making a petticoat for this, actually. I don't know what I had thought, really. But after I initially had cut out the skirt and seamed it together and tried it on, I quickly realized that I wasn't getting the shape I actually wanted. It was falling too straight down to the floor, and I wanted just a bit more poof, a bit more A-line. So a petticoat was the obvious way to go. I did actually look into buying some, but it just seemed easy to make one, to be honest. It was another thing that I then had to do, but I had a whole lot of fun making it, so we'll include that in this video as well. When I had cut out all of my skirt pieces, I had been left with a huge, long, almost 8-meter strip at the bottom of the fabric. So I had selvage edge on one long side of that. And I actually ended up using that as the bottom ruffle for my petticoat, so that even if the skirt kind of lifted up, you would be seeing the same fabric. And I decided not to hem it because it was just a selvage edge. So that was amazing and very helpful. So I constructed the petticoat bottom up, basically. I had actually no, I didn't construct it bottom up. I constructed it kind of haphazardly, to be honest. So I had the bottom ruffle I knew I was gonna add. I had a mini skirt pattern that I'd used before that I kind of modified and made like the top bit of the petticoat, so that was pretty snug around my waist and hips. And then to connect those 2 pieces, because obviously if I just added the ruffle onto the mini skirt, it would have been way too short. I just made a rough trapezoid kind of pattern piece to go in the middle to give me that A-line progression down. And then I attached ruffles out of tulle? Is it tulle? I think it's tulle. I don't know why I've suddenly forgotten this word in English. So this was the only additional material that I had to go purchase, actually. I had the middle trapezoid shape is just from some leftover fabric. Actually, the same fabric I used to line the bodice. So it was from my grandmother, and the colors actually really matched, and it looks really cool. And then I bought 4 meters of tulle. I was unsure whether or not it was gonna be enough, but I cut it into long strips, seamed them together, ruffled them. This took ages, by the way. I tried out just ruffling them at the machine, where you just kind of shove it under. And surprisingly, I'd never tried it before, but it did work. And this wasn't something where the ruffles had to be super even. So that definitely worked in my favor. I don't think I have a whole lot more. Oh yeah, closure-wise for the petticoat. Initially, I had actually, speaking of the whole 18th century tie closure, I had just created a long tie at the top to be able to tie it around, but I found that the skirt hooks were somehow a lot more comfortable when the garments were closed with those. I don't know if it distributes the tension differently, or because I can make the fit snug but not too snug and the ties are more difficult to adjust. I don't know. Anyway, I ended up going back later and adding a hook and eye as well to the petticoat, so that was how that closed. This is the petticoat. Please excuse the creases. It's been packed away a bit, smushed together. So you can see the top bit, the mini skirt-ish portion, and then the original tie closure hanging off there to the side. Then I added this middle section to get it long enough out of the same fabric that I lined the bodice with. And then here is the insanely long ruffle at the bottom with the handy dandy selvage edge just hanging freely. And the layers of tulle on top. I actually think it looks pretty nice. I like the way the colors all work together. I bought the brown tulle on purpose to get something nice. So the tulle is only attached here at the top. Oh, focus please. And then in several layers going down. But a little really went a long way with this. And then if I pull this up, you can see where I went back in and added a hook and eye to close it with instead of the ties. Yeah, but a pretty simple construction and just a bit of fun. And with that, I had a finished skirt and a finished dress. We've been through the whole dress now. Oh, that feels good. That feels good. I've actually been putting off making this video for quite some time. One thing I hadn't thought about when planning this whole wedding series post-wedding was, to be honest, a bit of wedding fatigue. I didn't really want to talk more about the dress or the wedding, or I was just ready to move on. So that's why this video has been a while in the making. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!